Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Endless Celts Podcast. I hope you're all well who's listening and watching along. I'm delighted to be able to welcome back David Webb. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me back on.
No, man, it's a pleasure. I appreciate you coming on, and we're going to get
No
stuck into a whole
problem.
range of topics tonight. I think it's perfect, as I said to you off further, kind of to round it off, come a wee bit of talk about transfers, how it goes on within professional football clubs. But before I go on to that, there is some interaction in the comments already. Phil McGinley's in, John's in. And I will encourage us, any questions you have for David Webb, fire them in, because I'll be giving them all barrels tonight anyway. So we're ready to crack on. But before I get into actual the kind of scouting side of things and what you're up to now and what you've done, I want to talk about how you started, because I know briefly before we spoke, when it was all up in the air last year before the season started, there was speculation about who
Yes.
was getting the Celtic job and would it be Eddie Howe?
Yes.
Would you be involved? We had a good chat about that and things, and again, I appreciate that. But from yourself, your career, it's kind of a strange, or like a not like a kind of football career path, so to speak. You went into the coaching, scouting, technical director. How did it all start?
Yeah, it all started probably back in about 2001 with the old Wimbledon. I started off as a community coach, working in schools, working at local kids. Then I was still sort of playing semi-pro at the time, and sort of I realised at 21 that my football career wasn't probably going to take off the way I wanted. But so I went down the coaching badge route, did my then it was a level two and then level three, and then progressed up to sort of move into the academy setting to work with sort of underage, under 11s, under 12 teams. And then unfortunately, Wimbledon back then, it sort of folded as it did. And then I moved on to Crystal Palace, continuing doing the same sort of stuff with working with the academy. But I sort of had a good fascination of sort of, recruiting young players, because Palace at the time was back in 2002, 3 had a hotbed of talent sort of around the area. And I felt that when we was playing other local teams that we weren't really being, we probably lacked a sort of a little bit of the more sort of local talent, the street players. So being from not too far from the area, I sort of managed to sort of tap on some local resources, local clubs, local affiliations, and then managed to sort of help Crystal Palace open up a few doors of looking at a different diverse player. And we was fortunate enough to have players like Wilfie Zaha come through that process as well, which was, he's Palace legend now. He's done phenomenal.
Oh,
So from that, where did I go? I went to Tottenham. First stint at Tottenham. Again, continuing on the coaching scene with more of the older age groups on this one, so sort of 12, 13s, 14s, and sort of did some work with the under 16s as well, but still keeping a hand on recruitment, still enjoyed that part as well. Obviously, if I could, on my extra time, discover some new talent that would be good enough for Tottenham's academy. I was there for about 2, 3 years, and moved on to Mill when my first sort of senior role was head of academy coaching. That was 9s to 14s, and I had an emphasis still again on recruitment. And then I went a bit left field because I did the academy manager's license back then at the time, 2008-9. We had to do a European study. I ended up doing it in Germany for Bayer Leverkusen, and built a really good relationship over the first 3 days. Thought I was just going to go there and do observations, watch training, speak to some coaches, see how it all works, how it runs, how the club operates, etc. And then because I was doing a master's at the time in sports psychology, they got me doing some sort of scouting work while I was there. And they really enjoyed some of the stuff I did on the characteristic side of players, especially the young players. And from that, when I sort of left to come back, I sort of had a conversation with Rudy Voller at the time. He said, would you be interested in just doing some like consultancy work or ad hoc work if we needed you to look at a young talent that we're potentially looking at? Would you be able to do some work on that for us? And I was like, yeah, no, it'd be great if Mill were okay with it. And Mill being in League One, Bayer Leverkusen being a big Bundesliga club, there wasn't really no conflict of interest, shall we say? So, so that was really fun. Did that for sort of about 18 months or so. Then I went to Southampton, pure scouting, 15s to 21s. I was there for about 3.5 years. Love Southampton, great club. Got first affiliated with Maurizio, one of my close colleagues, Paul Mitchell. So I really liked all the work he was doing there, of sort of finding top talent that could be good enough for Southampton, but not only just for the academy, but be good enough for the first team, just because of the way Maurizio operates. So that was really good fun. And then my first sort of into senior football in 2000, just from 2013, was with Eddie Howe at Bournemouth. They'd just been promoted to the Championship. Exciting times for the club. It was going for a transition with new ownership as well, with Max Denham. And within that 2-year period that I was there, we managed to sort of build a comprehensive team on a relatively moderate budget and find some real gems along the way, and win the Championship within 2 seasons and elevate to the Premier League. From there, I got the opportunity. I got approached from Paul Mitchell and Maurizio, who I worked with at Southampton, for a really exciting role at Tottenham, head of elite potential player identification, which was a new made-up. It was quite a mouthful title, but it was quite. It was quite.
Put that in your CV.
Yeah, it was. It does take up some space, but yeah, that was quite. I love that role because there's a chance to, when you work with someone like Maurizio, who is the coach, who's got a real passion and drive for young players to come through to the first team from the academy. So my role was to help Mitch set up a sort of a scouting program, which would be from first team down. My focus points was first team, but also underneath that 17s to 21s. And that would be trying to purchase sort of the best top talent in Europe, in the UK, and further afield if need be, that could not only just come into the club, but could be potentially within a small period of time be challenging for a first team place at Tottenham. So that was really exciting. And then I went back to foreign shores again to Ostersons, and that was my first role as a technical director. I worked with the current Forest Green coach now, Ian Birchnell. He was there at the time as the head coach. We had a really good relationship. Very small club. Just come off their points of Graham Potter, so they'd done really well under him. He had just left and moved on to Swansea at the time. So we built a young team there that could compete in the Allsvenskan, and getting acquainted with some familiar faces like Ravel Morrison and Charlie Colkett, we managed to integrate into the team as well, which really helped Ravel to propel back his career back in England at Sheffield United and now at Derby. And then from there, I had an approach from Huddersfield quite short into my contract, so quite a long contract. As soon as they made an approach and they bought me out of my contract to start at Huddersfield. And that was Huddersfield again, coming through a transition phase, new ownership, coming down from the Premier League, lots and lots going on, change of manager straight away. So there was lots of work to do in that head of football operations role. So that was, a quite challenging role, but again, really good club, really good people. And we managed to put some really good things in place, which are now sort of the club are getting their full fruits of.
Yeah, they got into the playoffs, didn't they, this year in the Championship?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. They done really well on again on a moderate budget. Some really clever recruitment. They've given the young coach a lot of time to work and familiarise himself with the squad. And I think if you can, especially in England or the modern day game where sometimes managers or head coaches don't get that luxury of time, this was definitely credit to Huddersfield in that respect, giving Carlos that sort of extra year, if you like, because the first year, if they went off that, it wasn't a great season, by his own or the team standards, and they could have quite easily changed coach, but they stuck with it, and then the team reaped the rewards and had a phenomenal season last year.
I mean, Phil McKinley comes in here. That's an obscene CV. They have a true wealth of experience from all over Europe. Amazing stuff. It truly is. And I heard you mention Ravel Morrison. You seem to have a soft spot for him going by your Twitter. I've seen a few posts for Ravel, but I will come on to him. But I want to rewind back to when you were talking about Palace, and you just name dropped Zaha. We spoke briefly about this last time as well, and amongst all other things we were talking about in our previous conversation. But how do you look at someone at a young age? Because I've been involved in some kind of young team coaching, obviously just normal grassroots kind of stuff, laying out cones, and you would turn to your mate who's coaching with you, be like, he's decent. But how do you notice from a young age that he could turn into a superstar? Because I know you're big in character. Could you see that from him at that early age?
You can see it's very hard at that young age, but I could see snippets because Wilf come over when he was about 7 or 8 with his family. Family didn't have a lot of money. They lived in an area in West Croydon. It was quite difficult for him to adapt. So I know, money wasn't great for him at that time. And he was playing in quite a small team in the Tandridge League in Croydon, which is where the local teams of Surrey and Croydon around those areas played. It was quite a newly formed team, didn't really sometimes wouldn't have the right kits because they couldn't afford it with parents and stuff. So, and I was actually tipped off by my sort of younger cousin who just said, "Dude, come and watch us play." So I came to watch us play when I had a break in coaching myself from Palace. And Wilfie stood out straight away. He was electric. He was very quick. He was very skillful. He was fearless, which I liked as well. He was absolutely fearless, not afraid to, because he'd never been coached, and that's what I liked about him. He had never been coached in a system or even played much in the team. So he was just, going players for fun, scoring goals. But yeah, he had that little bit of fearless street attitude in him where I suppose sometimes if it's not always the norm, but when you're sort of suffering a little bit of hardship sort of off the pitch, when you really sort of fight for things on the pitch, and he was certainly one that had that attitude where he didn't want to give in games, even if his team was losing. He was always working really hard. So he had some really, I'd say, good attributes simmering at a young age.
I mean, it's incredible. He's an amazing talent. Obviously, the move to United, I think, came too soon for him. But again, he's progressed again into that Crystal Palace team. He is their best player. One of our former players, Edward, plays for Palace now, so I do see him quite a lot now when I'm watching Edward play. But see as well, you were speaking about youth and like 15 to 21 and that kind of talent pool. Now, within Celtic Football Club itself, I'm a big believer like you should get a chance. Is that like a mantra for? Is that a mantra for yourself? Because even in Ostersunds and in the Swedish League and Huddersfield, I'm sure there's a big kind of constraint and budget. So you have to look within and look within a big group, as you said, like a community organisation, almost find these talents. Did that prove difficult sometimes to do that?
Well, at Ostersunds, it was the system was already quite set up in place. So they had this system where they would call it second chance players, because the owner at the time, Daniel Schimberg, he wanted to create an environment where it was a no blame culture. So he wanted players to come in, sort of, especially we did have sort of elder players, but if we were going to look to spend money or acquire players, he wanted them to be more younger. So the remit was that maybe we was looking at players, we called them second chance players that had been at big academies when they was young, maybe had some sort of exposure at 16, 17, 18 at their big clubs, hadn't quite gone on at that stage, and maybe gone out on loan, maybe it dropped down a level or two. So we provided the platform for them to go out and play competitive first team football in a European league, where the opportunities were, if you finished high enough, like any other UEFA ranking league, there was the opportunities to maybe get into, the Europa League, or, if you won the league, then you was in the champion, you was potentially in the championships or playoff. So, for those young players to come in at that time, like a Charlie Colkett, like there was Thomas Isherwood, who had been at Bayern Munich and Bradford. We took a young player called Francis Baptiste from Crystal Palace, and then obviously Ravel come in as well. So it was really a good time for these young players to come in and sort of platform and showcase what they could actually do, because they didn't actually get the opportunities before. So that's the kind of way sort of we operated in that, and kept it within sort of 17 to 22, 23 sort of age range.
Yeah, it's like almost as they buy the talent to sell it at a higher price. I think Celtic are kind of in that market at the moment. They kind of bring the talent in at 19, 20, 21 to look for that future sell on value further down the line, depending if they're a success or not. But see the likes of Ravel Morrison, again, another one you casually name dropped in there. But like he's like, he's like a maverick, I would describe him as, because you've heard Alex Ferguson talk about him in glowing terms. Harry Redknapp was a big supporter of him. He's been around the block in England, and by all accounts, he done well over in Sweden with Östersund. What is it with him that he can't just quite tap into his full potential of what he could be?
Yeah, Ravel was I think he's very misunderstood. I got to know him quite personally, spending a lot of time with him in Östersund over there as well, because, I was the one that managed to convince the ownership to sort of bring him over along with the head coach. We kind of felt a responsibility for him, and if we was reading on past reputation of, things that are said in the press and all the other stuff, then, we should have been quite worried. But he was the complete opposite. He was quite shy in some ways. He's very, very humble. Love working with the young players. He's, there's a couple of really nice stories about him where he went down to the club shop in Östersund town centre and would do autographs and stuff. And there was 2 kids that couldn't afford the shirts, and he bought them for them and pictures and signed them and stuff. And then he'd go into schools off his own back. And even with a kit man, our kit man come from, I think it was Ethiopia he came from, and he hadn't seen his family in 4 or 5 years. And Ravel, kindly paid for his flight ticket, to go and see his family, which he couldn't afford. So, all these little things. I think with Ravel, he just needed to feel an environment where he was kind of loved, because he had a hard time at Lazio previously. He was signed for one coach got sacked, then he found himself in the reserves. I think his upbringing, wasn't the greatest, in terms of it was quite tough for him. Single parent families and stuff like that, and maybe outside influences didn't help him.
Money as well, probably at a young age.
Yeah, the thing is with that, he's quite frivolous in that respect. I never really saw him as someone motivated by money, both things, because when he came from Lazio to Östersund, he took 75% pay cut.
Pay rise.
Yeah, to come. So yeah, there's no point we could do if then pay rises in Sweden. But so just little things like that. So I suppose once you get to know someone a little bit more, then you have a different, understanding of them from the media. And it was really good for him to see him go back, because Chris Wilder then took a chance on him for Sheffield United. Then he's, gone on to Derby and stuff. So and that's what Östersund was. It was a club that would bring these talents back to life, if you like.
I think as well, like the way you said, it brings it back to that character side of things, doesn't it? Like Morrison came over there and he's buying people's shirts, he's fitting into that ethos of the club, and it's like something I want to tap into yourself like deeply with as well. I mean, the character side of things with players is important. If they're fitting the system, they're fitting the culture. At Celtic, Hans Postecoglou himself, he's big in the ethos, he's big in his style, the way he plays. He doesn't want players going from that. In a scouting role, like when you're looking at players, no matter what club, you have to fit a style, you have to fit a certain culture within the club, or the manager requires a certain profile of player. How do you go about identifying that? And like from the point of contact to the actual sale itself, how do you go through that kind of step by step?
Yeah, there's each club will have their own set of ethos, values, philosophy, methodology, how you want to put it. And I suppose the best way to describe it was when we was at Bournemouth, we had sort of some key characteristics that we were trying to identify. That because we knew we knew the texture of the dressing room for a start. We knew the environment of the club, the area, what it represented, the playing style and philosophy. So once we got through that, we, together with our scouting team and Eddie Howe and his coaching team, we come together with sort of some key characteristics. We identify 5. We was never going to identify 5 in all the players, but we wanted to have at least a base of understanding. If he was a young player, that maybe could have 1 or 2, more of a senior player, maybe 2, potentially 3, and we're trying to identify it through sort of various means. So personally, from the scouting side, you could try to identify certain like work ethic, hard work, communication, handle pressure, body language, these sort of things in games where they can give you sort of a rough flavour of his character. Then we do all of our homework in terms of what we can find out, and then we can do in terms of what we find out on social media. So once we've got that base, that just gives us a base, then we'd match it up against, well, this is our values of our club, we kind of sort of characteristic profiling. So, and then there'll be certain things that we'd look to identify within that player. And then even stuff like into his background to see if he was a player at 2021, his background, if he was an overseas player, his culture, where the clubs he had played for, any sort of religious beliefs, any sort of cultural fits as well. So anything that we had to give us that sort of little bit of detail, and if we could marry these up with obviously his football side, the data side, then that would give us sort of a more rounded overview of the player's profile, rather than just going on using one tool as a decision. So we just tried to get as close as possible, as and then once the player's in the building, then it was down to the second phase, what we call the second phase, for the environment then to wrap its arms around the player, submerge himself in the culture with the coaching, and then that's his next phase of developing through the system.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you look back over time. I mean, you mentioned Wimbledon right at the start there. They obviously probably looked at a player and thought, he could do it without really getting into different things, especially back in the early 2000s, the 90s and things. And I'm sure it was like that among all the British-based clubs. But see, when you look at it from outside in and like different setups within football clubs, I'll keep it the kind of Scotland at the moment. You do see a lot of changes within Scottish football. You see them kind of leaning towards director of football, technical directors. Dundee themselves, they got relegated, but they've appointed Gordon Strachan as technical director. Hibs have Ben Kinsella. I think he came from Norwich. He's their head of recruitment. Yeah, and different people. Stephen Gunn at Aberdeen. What way do you find, I mean, yourself, your personal preference at a football club, the types of setup, what do you work the best in?
Yeah, for me, I think the technical director, sporting director role has been going on for sort of a very long time in Europe. As I mentioned, when I was at Bayer Leverkusen, Moody Voller was the sporting director there. And they had a really good system of two players had to come through from the academy each season. And the club was aligned in its values and its philosophy, the way it wanted to play. But that was a given. Whichever coach come in, the coach had to buy into the philosophy of the club. Obviously, bring his own personality and his own style, and he's hired for his expertise in that area. But it wasn't for a coach to come in to a system then and then bring, change all the staffing structures around, change the recruitment process around. They already had that structure in place, and that's how they worked in Germany for many years. And over the last 3 or 4 years, it's definitely coming into England more. Like you mentioned, the clubs in Scotland, even some of the League One, League Two clubs now are, becoming a little bit more forward thinking in that respect. And probably and I think COVID has probably helped that a little bit, because it's kind of a reset button for clubs to realise that when they are looking for what they used to call, especially in the British system, a manager, that it's far too expensive to maybe potentially have a manager bring in 4 or 5 members of staff, change a load of players around, and then if it doesn't work out, he's either relieved or someone else takes him, and the club's left in a bit of a mess and has to start all over again. So I think definitely a technical support structure that sits over there or alongside the head coach as well. So the head coach can then operate with the first team, with the players underneath, have a good sense of identity in the academy if the club's forward thinking enough that he wants to recruit from within. So he's got enough with those areas, managing the key staff around me, planning training, forward preparations, and day-to-day sort of planning with the players as well. If you have a head of football or a sporting director, whichever title the club wants to use, then I think, because there's many ways they want to use it. But then I think then a good sporting director would definitely have recruitment as one of his sort of overviews. definitely have I would say definitely academy would have to be one of his remits, along with some of the key departments in terms of sort of sports science, analytics, medical, and stretching maybe even to like the women's team as well, if the club has a women's as a girls team. So, and then I think that's really good in that way, because then you're getting a core philosophy throughout the teams, not only just the men's team, the women's team, the academy. So, and then a coach now. I speak to our fellow sporting directors. They're doing a lot more sort of coach profiling to fit their clubs. So instead of maybe sort of a merry-go-round of old, not say old school managers, but certain managers always coming around as different jobs, it's really good now because you're getting younger coaches that, extremely talented coming from under 23s that maybe have had a good season at lower level, maybe have been an outstanding assistant manager for someone. So, and they're getting opportunities, to make their own mark as a first team coach, as a head coach, and I think that's where the game is, becoming better for more opportunities for that. And if you're going to appoint sort of a younger coach into that system, then definitely a sporting director to support around them would be, in my opinion, would be the best way to go.
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point in the structure. It's good to have that in place in case something drops out. You can replace that seamlessly. But as you said, if they're building coaching profiles, and you brought up a really good point in terms of like younger managers, and I like to see that because it's forward thinking. The former Dundee United manager now, Tom Courts, it was his first professional job last season. He got them into Europe. Now he's away to Hungary. Tony Ashgar, their chief executive, replaced him with another good manager, Jack Ross. So it's kind of continuing that kind of trend. And Strangelove, the doctor, comes in. I do encourage us, by the way, in the comments, get involved, ask questions. How important is psychology in profiling a player in today's game?
Yeah, it's massive. I think it's one of the underrated traits that still needs to be developed. So, obviously, there's a lot of use of data out there, and data is phenomenally useful and fantastic. And in a modern day game, you can't. Most clubs now, you can't function without some sort of data program that can utilize your recruitment, your analysis, and give you sort of that that wider berth to the areas you got access to. But psychological profiling or characteristic scouting is extremely difficult. It was, I suppose, for me personally, it was more of a fascination because I was always interested in sort of human behavior, human beings, player development, and I did a master's in sports psychology as well because I was fascinated in that particular area. How players can grow and elevate in different environments. So it's definitely, for me, it's definitely being taken more seriously now. I think you've got to have a sort of good understanding of psychology to delve into these areas. So if somebody's a head of recruitment, if they have got a particular background of a sports psychology or that sort of profiling background combined with their expertise in the football field, that will definitely help because, again, it's a specialist subject. You'd have to know because one thing with human beings, it's unpredictable. No one can ever, with data, the numbers, they are what they are. But behind the data, there's always a reason. It's the psychology of the human being that produces the data. And we don't know what goes on in their daily lives or how things affect them or what their personal lives are, saying that could affect performance could have a great run for 4 or 5 months and suddenly dip off. And then do we just drop him off the chart because the data has just suddenly dipped? For me, that would potentially indicate maybe a change in his personal life. So this is where you have to be sort of really clever of combining it all together.
Is it like, this is going to probably sound really novice, and I do apologize for it, but is it like the case of you look at a player, his profile, how long he spends at clubs? If it's 1 year, 2 years, you're wondering why is there no like longevity? You look at his profile charts, and it's like he scores 10 this season, but it's 2 the next season. Doesn't really match up. Is that the kind of way you look at it, or is that just kind of an amateur way to think about things there?
Yeah, I think. I mean, listen, it's always good to measure sort of the consistency. It's something we look for more. Well, I've always asked my team to look out for, especially in the attacking players, of those consistency patterns, maybe over 2-3 seasons. And if there is dips and there is curves that that alternate and change that, then the question is, I would always say we don't just walk away because this season he's 15 goals, and the season after he's only scored 9 or 10.
Yeah.
Then the season after that he's gone back up to 12, 13, 14, 15 goals again. So that doesn't indicate that he's year 2 that he was a bad player. That indicates that there could have been something going on behind the scenes that's affected him. So in that way, you'd see that as a positive consistency pattern. If he's completely gone off, where he's had a really good season, and this next season he's not producing or firing goals or producing any sort of output on his data, then there could be, for me, I always like to know curiously what the reasons are behind that, to see if there is, because for me, talent don't just drop off the charts. It doesn't just go away. There's always a reason behind of that, and it could be a reason that why we don't sign him, or it could be a reason why we do sign him. So, but it's best just to get some clarity on that sort of understanding of why this has happened first before we make a decision.
You can kind of apply it to any sort of walk of life, can't you? I mean, if you work in a high pressure environment, if you're just, for example, in a sales environment and you're popping off 10 sales a week and then you drop to 2, there is and obviously an issue there to kind of be recognised. I do agree 100%.
Yeah.
If we go back to setups, I mean, I don't know if you keep much up to date with like Celtic going on and the kind of news, but they appointed Mark Lowell as head of recruitment and scouting. He was previously involved with the City Group and as a head of their kind of scouting network across their whole thing. But before I go into that appointment, the City Group kind of interests me in terms of what they do, the clubs they own. Is that, in my opinion, it looks like it's kind of putting monopoly on football if they own all these different clubs and have a talent pool. Do you think that can come across as a negative side of things, as maybe being the smaller teams can't get an advantage, or would they see it as they're banning these clubs, giving them the talent to use, and it's a win-win? What way do you see them kind of partnerships working?
Yeah, I think their intentions are, positive in terms of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to support these clubs as well, because they're not just purchasing the clubs and leaving them to run. There is sort of a plan and a structure behind it that whichever club they look to purchase, or some of the clubs they have beyond City, there's always a potential growth within the club. Maybe the club has underperformed the last few years, has fell on hard times financially, and they proved that they can sort of restructure clubs in a good way. So in that way, it's super positive, and players can come out of those pools and get the opportunities to go between their own clubs or move between other clubs. And it also produces sort of a lot of good coaches. I think Liam Manning come from that, the MK Dons coach. So he came from that with an opportunity to coach in Belgium for one of the second division teams. So the platforms for talent, staff-wise, player-wise, is good. Potentially, some people might see it as sort of an aggressive strategy, trying to cornerstone areas of the markets in different regions, different countries, different parts of Europe, South America, Asia, etc. So I think it depends on which viewpoint, which depends on who you talk to, would have the bias view. For me, I see it as they're quite positive because there's talent that's come through it and managed to maybe platform themselves and go on to different clubs if City Group hadn't have interjected. So so far it seems to me as a positive. Some people might disagree, but that'd be my take on it.
It is a bit of a strange one. I mean, strange of the data again comes in. The City Group has gained a massive sample size by owning so many clubs. It's a data goldmine, and it probably is. There's so much kind of data coming from that, scouting ways, networks, building up these organisations. And you mentioned Liam Manning. We got Postecoglou from one of City's own clubs in Japan. So I mean, Yokohama. Yes. So it is a win-win for us. And speaking about the type of the model that Celtic have at the moment with Mark Lowell as head of recruitment, did you ever hear him before, or is that a name that was cropped up for you in the footballing community?
Yeah, actually, I spoke to your current coach when I was at Huddersfield briefly when we was looking for a new coach, and I found him really, we spoke to him when he was, because when we was doing our coach profile, we obviously his name became interesting to us because of the style he played. He's very attacking. We did a lot of work on the way his teams played and how he was with a coach and his previous success with Australia. And at the time, we couldn't, from where he was, Huddersfield we couldn't move it forward as quickly as we wanted to, which was a shame at the time because I found him, we had some chats on the phone and I found him fascinating. I thought he would be a good fit for a British club, definitely, especially with his mannerism, his character, and his playing style is, is quite easy on the eye. It's very Guardiola-esque in a lot of ways. That's he basically sort of models. He's got his own stamp on it. Of course, he has, but that's maybe if he was to say a platform. So, but yeah, there was no doubt when he was appointed at Celtic, he would be successful. Given he had a little bit of a shaky start, which should be expected, but 2 or 3 months in, once the players got used to his way of working, his philosophy, playing style, man management, etc., I knew that he would, become really successful and really pleased for him.
See, that's interesting because Phil McGinley comes in again and said in an interview he spoke to Southern a few years ago, and I have to say, David, I'm so happy he didn't get him, to be honest, because he's a godsend. And the way you said, like, you wanted to move along quickly, was that kind of like saying that he was going to be the first choice, or was there candidates in that?
He was definitely one of a few up there. We had when we was looking for a head coach, we had sort of a massive influx of sort of applications and interest in the role, which naturally, because Huddersfield just come down from the Premier League and had a really good competitive squad for the Championship. So, once we narrowed it down, we did our own sort of profile and work on coaches of what we wanted and the sort of playing style and certain things with like academy production, and there was sort of various points. And when we sort of narrowed it down and we looked into him further, he came out sort of really well. So we made contact and we had a chat, and he was great to chat to. He was very on board with working with someone like myself, like a head of football type role that could support him around the footballing side, so he could just solely focus on the team and bringing young players through and performances. So that's fundamentally what we was looking to do. So yeah, very interesting guy, but we couldn't. There was a sort of a time frame that under the new ownership wanted to, because the team hadn't been winning. Hadn't been winning too well at the time. I think they hadn't won a game in 17. So, because being where he was in Asia, it was a bit harder to move him quickly. So it was very unfortunate for Huddersfield. But obviously Huddersfield's lost Celtic's game.
100%. I mean, that process took ages for Celtic to get him across. Obviously, isolation. And just to let you know, Paul's giving you a bit of stick here. He wants you to stick on a lamp. But the way,
yeah. To always put a light on, yeah.
Well, that's just the viewers giving you a fun. Like, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want.
Hold on, I'll see if I can get it on from here.
But yeah, Postecoglou.
Yeah.
I mean, like, as you said, he's a fascinating guy, and what strikes me about him the most is that he seems real. He seems genuine. His style of play is for everyone to see. The inverted fullback was so foreign to a Scottish club. I know Bayern Munich done it with Pep and City, and as you said, he came from the City organisation. So, see, in them conversations, did you speak about tactics and things and what way it would play out and forward-thinking plans and things, just in case?
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke a lot about like how we wanted to progress at the time at Huddersfield as a club. We spoke a lot about his playing style. He played a 4-3-3 formation. The way he liked to sort of develop, he did like to develop play from the back and play through the third, dominate possession. Once he got into the attacking areas, would like to sort of dominate the opponents and attack spaces as quickly as possible, but also have a lot of high possession in good areas where sometimes if the teams were set up in low blocks or become more defensive. So I found him quite an articulate and intelligent man that understood the game to a higher level. He obviously knew his system inside out, and he knew how to to use his system against, various teams, against various formations that, might play different styles to his. So he was very well informed of, had a good understanding of the Championship as well, I would say. Let me just see if I can get these blinds open, conscious that you can't see me.
Look at you done. There you go. We're flying.
He's put me off. He's put me off my game. How about that?
He's back in the room. There you go, Paul. There you go. He's back. They're all concerned, saying that energy prices are soaring. That's why he doesn't want to turn on the lights. But here,
Oh, he's not wrong there. He's not wrong.
100%, 100%. But back to Postecoglou. I mean, the way he comes across, as you said, the way he plays, and we had the Japanese journalist Dan Orwitz on our show here a couple of weeks ago, and he explained that at the start of the season he was kind of misunderstood because he said he's more about attack instead of defence. But what he meant was defence takes care of itself because he presses high, wins the ball high, counter presses, and kind of gets the goals from there. Because if you look at Celtic this season, David Lilabada, Felipe Yada on the wings are highest goal contributions along with Kyogo and Mieta and people like Giakoumakis come on the scene towards the latter part of the season. But speaking about like scouting and the transfer window now and what's kind of happening in this process, Postecoglou's big in different markets. He's mentioned Japan, he's mentioned Iran, Saudi Arabia. Were you aware of these markets and kind of the potential in them with Kyogo? Have you ever heard any of these players?
Yeah, they do come up in terms of the clubs when I was operating at Tottenham. We had a phenomenal scouting system, so we concentrated on certain markets based on sort of the way Poch played, but we would know the Asian players, the South American market. We would know sort of from the Middle East as well, any potential players that fitted our remit that would flag potentially if there was any outliers in there. We definitely knew. So if there was 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, good form, scoring goals, putting in outstanding performances from these further afield countries, we would definitely know about them. So I think sometimes people always was worried about the adaptation. Could they come in and sort of cope with physical football and stuff? But I think with your current coach, what he's got is he's got a lot of faith in his own methodology. He's got faith in players where he's not looking at, they come from Asia, they come from the Middle East, they come from Europe, could be, Scottish. He sees players as players as values, and he sees them as people. And I think that's what makes him kind of, really successful. So he's not afraid to, go further afield. For me, talented players are talented players. As long as you're aware of their, if they are coming from these countries, their cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, it could be certain things you've got to be aware of when they are coming from lands further afield. But if you can integrate them in part of your system, like he's done really well, then sure. I mean, there's talent is talent.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the likes of Kyogo, he came in, he was his first signing from Japan, and he does set the SPL alight. His movement, I mean, it's second to none. And then you got Rio Hatate come in, you got Ideguchi, albeit he was injured. Do you know what I mean? Players like that, and it's Mieta. His pressing, have you seen him play? His pressing is insane. He just keeps going and keeps going. But see, in terms of the kind of model Celtic have now with Mark Lowell appointed head as recruitment, we spoke last year about any of this being in place, right? And Mark Lowell, to me, seems like a forward-thinking appointment. I don't know what the opinion of the guy is in the football and kind of director of football role within your kind of eyes and things, but do you see this as a positive thinking step from Ans? Because he worked with him at Yokohama, he brought some players in with him. Do you think this is kind of correlation with Ans Postecoglou?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think to definitely help him, because if you've got someone that you've had a good relationship before, you're both on the same alignment of the way that you're going to look to develop the club, develop the recruitment strategies, develop the philosophies. I think when you're looking at recruiting players, if the sporting director understands the coach and what the club's needs are, and they can identify players to fit into those remits, then you'll get a lot more output, a lot more success doing it that way. So the fact that they've worked together is definitely shows that there's a positive step in that direction, that they're looking to be on the same hymn sheet, if you like, in terms of their thinking and progression and their ambitions. And it can only get stronger. It can only get stronger for the club, especially going into the second and third season. If they can maintain that alignment, it's only good things for Celtic to go and build on.
Yeah, 100%. And Egyptian King comes in here. I've never seen a player. I love a manager as much as we Kyogo and Big Ans. It's unbelievable. And it's strange of the doctor again, Dave, comes in. How important is AI in alerting clubs to outline player metrics and player performances today at the top level. I've seen a lot of that recently in terms of the game. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, it is, and it is again still quite a little bit underdeveloped. There's no sort of no foolproof metrics out there that can guarantee success. It's always tipping the odds as much as you can in your favour. But for me, when you're using AI, when you're using a form of psychology, a form of metrics, you have to. There's always two key points when you're recruiting players. There's always you have to understand the metrics and audits of your own club first and foremost, and you have to understand the metrics of where the player is coming from. And if you can get some correlations and matching between those, then you've got a better chance of success of them developing through that system. So it all depends on how it's used, and again what expertise they have around it. How it's being used, what's its functionality, how much impact is it having in terms of recruitment or player profiling or day-to-day player care. Even can be develop it in those areas as well, sort of your own, not just recruiting players, but use it for your own players, for coaches to build better connection, to understand their players a lot more as well. So it hopefully it should, over the next, as data sort of has kicked on and now is sort of the big thing that people use, if this can be developed in a certain way where you can get some really good quality work in these areas, it's only going to enhance the performance, because psychology is always going to be an unknown quantity, because you just can't guarantee human behaviour from day to day.
I think as well that you use AI now to kind of predict injuries and when it's going to happen. I've seen that being implemented at certain clubs, and it's quite interesting to see where that's going. And Phil McGinley comes in, David. He says, David mentioned Southampton earlier on, running down a CV. Who at St Mary's has got their eye on Celtic results, as they seem to come for our players more than any other team? Can you answer that one?
Well, because of Van Dijk's previous.
Big Van Dijk. Wanyama.
Yeah, big fan. Yeah, Wanyama as well. I think in terms of, it's sometimes when you're looking at, if you look at those particular two players like Van Dijk and Wanyama, I think when you're looking at, because the Scottish League still can be quite physical and quite demanding. So when you're looking at transference of skills, as these particular players like Van Dijk came from Holland, where if he was a central defender, he probably wasn't getting much physical contact because they're encouraged to play out from the back. They tend to drop off a little bit more. They're not so much ultra aggressive pressing teams, pressing monsters. So I think for clubs like Southampton, when they're looking at players like this, they look at, yes, he's got the technical competence coming from Holland, but then you're looking to imagine against the physicality where Celtic at the time were, they're in Europe, they're getting exposed to play big teams. Obviously, they're being very competitive in their own domestic league. So I think that becomes sort of an interest of someone like a Southampton that are not really going to compete for the top players in the world, like Man City or Chelsea or Liverpool. So they have to look for players on the rise. So at the time, Van Dijk and Wanyama, they were definitely two players on the up. There were two players that were. Did Armstrong come from there as well?
Armstrong, yeah, there's another one.
Armstrong. He was at Dundee originally, wasn't he? He was at Dundee United. I remember looking at him for Bournemouth, but he, I think that's what they look to. They look for them sort of polished gems that are playing in, a competitive league, that they get a chance for European exposure. They're getting exposed to that little bit of physicality in the British system, and with their other attributes, then they could have the potential quality to play in the Premier League. And Southampton have always been a good grounding for these type players as well, that can go on and develop through their system a little bit, and then maybe sometimes like Van Dijk go on, for the top teams.
Van Dijk's, he's head and shoulders the best centre back in the world at the moment. Like, I think he's absolutely incredible. Wanyama, remember he came in from Gearshot in Belgium. It would pay like £600,000 for him. No one knew what to expect, and he played against Barcelona and beat them 2-1. Scored that header. He was an incredible player, good defensive midfielder. And you mentioned Armstrong. He's one player I really miss, because I think he breaks the lines really well. He picks the ball up. He can dribble. He can score. And he's seen the importance for him for Scotland the other night. He scored a couple of cracking goals as well to pick their form up. which is incredible. And in terms of the kind of round it off as well, and I know we're stressing near the hour here. I appreciate your time, David. The analytical side of things within football, I know we kind of touched upon it, but is that where you're seeing it going now with like every club, and even clubs over where I live in Ireland, in the north of Ireland, you see the semi-professional teams that have the things around their waist, like their chest, to measure their running speed and their physicality, how far they can jump. And this is semi-professional. It seems like it's just going that way throughout football, the organisations.
Yeah, they are. I think teams now, even like you mentioned, that teams that semi-professional teams or sort of like League One, League Two teams, or teams that are not what you'd associate with being sort of within the modern trends are adapting to it, because a lot of the clubs, especially here in England, like League One, League Two clubs, even National League clubs now, that they're using various data forms in terms of, especially on their fitness side, with their heart measurements and GPS and tracking systems and stuff. But even there's so much data out there where you can use your analysis for the opposition. You can use data to pinpoint players to help them in your certain remits. There's various ways that you can use data to work for your club. And there's so many sort of young, talented sort of analysts or analytical young coaches coming into the games with lots of great ideas that can sort of manufacture stuff for the smaller clubs, probably less cost effective than some of the bigger data packages out there. It's anything that you can get an edge to, will give your club a fantastic advantage. And data is, in its purest form, can Liverpool use it at the highest level really well. Then I know Newport County use it really well in League One, and Notts County in the National League, and like you say, some of the clubs in Ireland. So it's definitely the way forward. I think sometimes if you speak to some of the top data experts, that they all say about condensing it down, because sometimes you can have data overload, and sometimes with data, too much of it can stifle your decision making from your natural instincts. So if you've got an array of data that can tell you, if you had say for example, you had a certain gut feeling or an instinct about a player or a situation within your football club, and the data might tell you different, then obviously that can sometimes be a conflict of interest. It can also maybe prolong decisions, where in a vicious market like football, sometimes you haven't got that luxury of waiting. So as if you talk to the top people that use it at the highest levels, they try and condense it down, simplify it as much as possible, and use it as a really powerful aid to enhance decision making, but not to be the decision maker, if that makes sense.
I think as well, like you mentioned, like there's all sorts of data, XG, expected goals, conceded goals, expected points, that type of thing. And sometimes when I'm on Twitter and I'm going through the pages and it tells you what they expect, and you're looking at tables, you don't really understand it. I 100% get where you're coming from in terms of that overload and the professional top clubs doing it in a different way. But sometimes, in my opinion, the naked eye plays a good part too. What you see sometimes is what you get. I don't know what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can't take away from your raw natural instincts. I've made a really good career out of that in terms of my recruitment. Just having that sort of natural understanding and instinctive understanding, especially of players that I'm looking at to recruit into my club, without knowing the data. Sometimes, if you understand your club really well, and you understand football, and you understand human beings and basic sort of elements of psychology, you are going to have a really good understanding and feel. It's not always going to be right a lot of the time, but you can't ignore that. You can't. That's something that could be a key decision, where it could win or lose you a player, win or lose you a game. So just as important as data is, because data sometimes, let's say, can overthink it, and sometimes if you think too much, then it's gonna, you could end up with the wrong decision.
100%. I think as well, you look at it, and as you said, prolonging the decision. Just for example, it's signing a player. You don't make that choice. You wait 3 or 4 weeks, and then he's gone, and he has a cracking season somewhere else. Sometimes you need to trust your gut. And just while we were on air, David, Celtic have announced the signing of Swiss goalkeeper Benjamin Siegrist on a 4-year contract, formerly of Dundee United last year. So again, a great show all round here, like a new signing for Celtic coming in. But what is your future ambitions for you? Where do you see yourself? That sounds like a CV. It sounds like I'm interviewing you. But like,
Yeah, it does.
where do you want to be?
Yeah, I've had a good think about this over the last few months because I've just been doing some sort of independent consulting work while I was sort of pondering my next move. I'm in a good position now where I'm ready to go back in for the right project. Absolutely, but for me, it has to be the right project. And with my background as well, I'd be looking at a very good sporting director project or even a head coach's project to work alongside a very good sporting director. And using my skill set that way. So I have spoke to a couple of clubs on both, but it's just for me, it's just a project I really get the feel for that it's going to really excite me whether I can, because each clubs I think, and we're having this debate in England about sporting directors, coaches, can they overlap? But in Europe they've been doing it for years.
Mm-hmm.
Sporting directors will go into a coaching role quite easily, and over here sometimes because sporting directors are not seen in the same value, they think they're sort of just statisticians or recruitment experts. But so those are the two sort of main areas I'm focused on, and it would be the interesting project for me.
I think one of the most famous people that kind of goes between roles is Ralph Rangnick. He upstairs and then he's downstairs coaching and stuff. He's an incredible coach. He's an Austria now, but obviously didn't work out for him at Manchester United. But again, I do thank you for your time, David. But to finish off, I think it made you do your dream team last time you were on your five-a-side dream team. But this is purely of players you identified yourself. What would your five-a-side be?
So Zaha, we'd have to include in there. Song, Tottenham, Callum Wilson, Bournemouth. I would say Smith Rowe from when I took to Huddersfield, even though I didn't identify him for Arsenal, but he turned the season around, so I'd have to include him in there. I think.
What a player!
Yeah, he was phenomenal. And I'm going to go for Dan Gosling when he was at Bournemouth as well, because we signed him on a free at Newcastle, and he was probably one of the most underrated players. In terms that he never got applauded. It's like a Callum or some of the other players, but what a player! Great engine, great character. It was that glue in the middle of the park. So yeah, and a free transfer from Newcastle, which was even better.
Yeah, 100%. Get that value for money in there, isn't it? So it's Dan Gosling, Emil Smith Rowe, Wilfred Zaha, Callum Wilson, and Heung-min Son. For Tottenham. Yeah. What a team. What a team. Put Son by himself, he'll score all the goals.
Yeah, I know. That's incredible. He's a phenomenal player.
Just quickly, how'd you find him? How'd you get him? I actually didn't even ask you about him.
Yeah, no, Son was he was at Leverkusen, and when I first came to Tottenham again, he fitted the remit of a young player that had a good season at Leverkusen, not outstanding but good, but he ticked some of the attributes that we was looking for. We knew Poch could develop, so it wasn't just what he was doing on the ball and his output. It was, like you say some of your players at Celtic, he was an absolute pressing machine, and he could run beyond. He runs beyond the ball as well, like selfishly, like you see him now. He runs when he links off players. Was incredible. So it just needed to be refined. And we knew that we had the coach in Maurizio to do that. And obviously I understood by Leverkusen, the way it developed players and stuff, and how he developed through that system. And he came through that. And we managed to watch him, quite a few times. I watched him 4 times myself. He was a player I put forward. And we was, really fortunate enough to get him at the time, because where he was a little bit under the radar, he wasn't attracting the interest of, the big clubs. So he came to us relatively cheap, like 15 million or something for a Tottenham signing. Yeah, it was really
good. Sound like we've blown their budget.
No. So yeah, he's a phenomenal player and a phenomenal character.
Well, David, again, I appreciate it coming on. What a five-a-side team of players you identified, and what a guest you've been. Have you enjoyed it this time round? Video as well?
Loved it. Thank you for having me back on. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. And to everyone who's watched along, stay well and keep safe. Hail, hail.